There were plantations across the American South that bore names meant to sound like hope: Eden Hill, Prosper Grove, New Liberty. Yet behind those words lay blood and bone, screams and silence. Among them, one name was whispered by the few who dared to remember: the Cella Plantation, deep in the moss, thick woods of Wilcox County, Alabama, circa 1843. To outsiders, it was a marvel of order, endless rows of sugar cane and cotton, tended by slaves who never tried to flee. To traders, it was a model of productivity, its profits unmatched. But to the enslaved people within its boundaries, Cella was a prison built on deception. Unlike other plantations, no woman ever ran, not once, not in 30 years. The overseers bragged about it in taverns, how their ladies were too content, too protected, too grateful to risk escape. But the truth, as it always does, would crawl up from beneath the floorboards, from beneath the soil, from beneath the cellar that gave the place its name. The Cella Plantation belonged to Major Thaddeus Redden, a Confederate loyalist before there was even a Confederacy. He had inherited the land from his father, a Scotsman who'd first carved his fortune from flesh and fear. But where the father used the whip, the son used the mind. Redden believed in obedience through dependency. He outlawed violence against slave women publicly. He abolished the lash for female servants, claiming that a woman's nature bends with kindness, not cruelty. He built them cottages, small but clean, and even a chapel. On Sundays, the women were seen singing hymns, their voices drifting like smoke across the cane field. Visitors praised his progressive methods. They said Cella was proof that the South could be both civilized and profitable. But they never saw the lower barn. They never saw what the women saw. In the quarters, the stories whispered between breaths said the same thing, that every woman who entered the main house after sundown never came back quite the same. That Redden's favored few, the ones given silk gowns and light work, often disappeared for weeks, only to return silent, staring, their bellies swelling like the full moon. Children were born in Cella by the dozens each year, yet few were seen past infancy. Some were sold. Others vanished entirely, and still no one ran, because every woman knew, if she ran, she wouldn't be running from the master. She'd be running from what was underneath. It began with a woman named Eleanor, a seamstress brought from Virginia after her master's debt forced her sale. She was quiet, sharp-eyed, and known for her memory. Within a year she had noticed patterns. Women called to the house at night, the strange smell from the east cellar, and the cries that sounded not quite human. Eleanor began to keep a secret journal using ash and lard to mark wooden boards beneath her bed. She counted every disappearance. By her count, 40. 3 women had been taken in 3 years. The plantation record books listed only 10 deaths. Her notes ended abruptly one August night in 1846, when she herself was summoned to the manor. Her body was never found. But her journal was, hidden behind a chimney stone, discovered almost 15 years later by a house servant named Dinah. It would spark a rebellion that the South would try to erase. A rebellion that would make the name Cella forbidden in plantation lore for generations. Narrator tone darkens the camera in the mind, pans through the house inside the manor. Beneath the grand dining hall was a staircase that led down into a stone passage. Redden called it the vault. His ledger described it as a preservation room for storing supplies, but the walls told another story. The first layer was brick, the second iron, and below that carved stone older than the house itself. Rumor said the original builder was not Redden's father, but a local architect who had gone missing soon after the foundation was laid. His tools were found buried in the swamp a mile away. The space was damp, cold, and lined with chains. That was the Cella, not just a name, but a place. And in that darkness, Redden's experiment began.
He believed he could breed loyalty, that if he created new generations of enslaved children who never knew freedom, never even dreamt of it, he could mold a population utterly obedient. He called them his Cella borns. The women were chosen for their health, their obedience, and their silence. They were told they would serve in comfort. Instead, they were locked beneath the manor for months, fed and watched, their bodies forced into cycles of reproduction by men chosen not for desire, but for strength. The Breeding Cella, as it was later called by survivors, became the heart of Cella Plantation's wealth. Each birth meant another product to sell. Each child meant another dollar, and each silence meant another secret kept. So why did no woman ever run? Because escape was not freedom. Outside the plantation, slave catchers hunted. Inside, Redden promised safety, food, and mercy if they obeyed, and for those who didn't, they went below. The fear of the Cella kept everyone still, until 1851. That year, a new woman arrived, Martha, sold from South Carolina after striking her former master. She had a scar across her cheek and eyes that refused to bow. She had seen the auction blocks, the cages, the blood. But she had never seen fear like the women at Cella carried, that trembling obedience that seemed carved into their bones. Martha didn't sing hymns, she didn't smile, and she didn't believe the lie of Redden's mercy. When she heard the faint crying under the floorboards one night, she didn't look away. She followed it to the cellar door sealed with an iron bar, and what she found there would burn the illusion of peace that Cella had built for decades. It would turn the plantation that no woman ever fled into the one. Every woman would die trying to escape. Music fades, narrator's voice steady and foreboding. This is the story of the Cella Plantation where silence was bought. Motherhood was weaponized, and freedom began not with a man's revolt, but with the discovery of what lay beneath the house of mercy. The summer of 1851 came with heat thick as syrup, the kind that made the cane stalks hum with insects and the air taste of iron. On a Tuesday morning, when the mist still clung low over the swamp, a wagon rolled through the gates of Cella Plantation. Inside it sat a woman in chains. Her name was Martha. She was 26 strong, shouldered, her hands calloused from years of field work in South Carolina. The scar on her left cheek, a pale rope of skin, marked the day she had swung a sickle at her overseer. That scar had bought her a one-way ticket to Alabama, sold for half her worth to Major Thaddeus Redden. The overseer, Mr. Paulding, spat tobacco as he signed for her arrival. "Don't try no fight in here," he warned, tapping the butt of his whip against the wagon rail. "Major Redden don't believe in women, but we got other ways to make you quiet." Martha said nothing. Her eyes flicked across the horizon, the manor house standing tall, the rows of cabins neat as graves, and the strange silence that seemed to hang over the place. She noticed how the women moved like ghosts, slow, careful, their eyes always lowered. Not a single child played outside. It wasn't normal. In every plantation she'd known, there were children, small hands picking, small feet running, mothers calling. But here, only the sound of the wind moved between the cabins. That first night, Martha was placed in cabin 6, beside the chapel. The women inside barely spoke to her. One, an older woman named Dinah, helped her wash the dust off her face. Another, Lottie, gave her cornbread without meeting her eyes. When Martha asked where the children slept, no one answered. At dusk, a bell rang, low, hollow, and wrong somehow. The women stood, smoothed their aprons, and began to hum a hymn. Dinah pressed a finger to her lips. "We sing at sundown," she whispered. "Why?" Martha asked. "So they don't hear us cry." That night, Martha lay awake, listening. Beneath the floorboards, faint as breath, she heard something. A muffled sob, or maybe just the wind, but it carried rhythm, almost like breathing. She turned over, heart pounding, staring at the ceiling. The hymn had stopped. The plantation was silent again. But in that silence,
She heard something else, metal scraping stone. The next morning, she was taken to the fields.
The work was hard but organized. Overseers shouted commands, and the women obeyed with unnatural calm. When one woman fainted from heat, no one moved to help until Paulding barked an order. Even then, they lifted her silently, like pallbearers. Martha muttered under her breath, "Ain't nobody alive in this place." That evening, she saw something that confirmed her unease. Near the manor, 2 men carried a woman wrapped in linen. They moved quickly, avoiding attention. The bundle sagged like dead weight. When Martha asked Dinah who it was, Dinah's face went pale. "You ain't seen nothin'," she whispered. "You want to live long here. You keep your eyes down." But Martha had never been the kind to keep her eyes down. Days turned into a week. On the 7th night, rain began to fall, heavy, beating against the cabins. Martha couldn't sleep. She sat by the small window, staring toward the manor where a single lantern still burned in the basement windows. Then she saw it. The ground near the main house opened a door half, hidden under ivy, pulled wide by 2 men with torches. Between them, they led a woman barefoot, trembling down into the earth. The woman's face glowed white in the lightning flash. Martha recognized her. It was Sarah, one of the sewing girls, who'd been missing for 2 days. When the men disappeared into the ground, the door shut. The rain covered all sound, but Martha could feel her skin crawl. She whispered to herself, "Were they tacking them?" The next morning, Sarah's name was scratched off the work roster. No one mentioned her again. Martha went to Dinah. "I seen her. They took her down under the house. What's down there?" Dinah's hands trembled as she kneaded dough. "Don't ask. The ones that go below don't come back." "What's below?" Dinah looked at her, eyes hollow, voice low. "They call it the Cella. That's where the master makes the babies." Martha's stomach turned. "What you mean?" But Dinah wouldn't speak further. She only said one thing before turning away. "Don't go near that house, girl. The ones that look find the truth, and the truth don't let you sleep." That night, Martha dreamed of chains clinking under her bed, of voices crying through stone. She woke before dawn, sweating, heart racing, the faint hum of the plantation already beginning outside, as if nothing had ever happened. But inside her, something had changed. She had seen the fear. She had seen the lie of peace. And she knew whatever waited beneath that manor, it was the reason no woman ever ran. She whispered into the morning light, "Then I'll be the first." For weeks after that storm, Martha carried the secret like a stone in her chest. She worked, ate, and sang when told, but her eyes were always fixed on the manor, the heart of the darkness. The women had grown used to her questions. Some stopped answering altogether. Others simply looked away. But Dinah, the old cook, seemed torn between fear and guilt. There was something she wanted to say, something that hovered on her lips, but never found courage. Then one night, the chance came. A baby had died in the cabins, a child no older than 2 weeks, born sickly, gone quiet before sunrise. It was the 3rd that month. The mothers gathered outside the chapel, candles flickering against the wind. Redden forbade mourning, yet the women prayed anyway, their hums echoing in soft waves. When the crowd dispersed, Dinah found Martha waiting near the well. "You keep asking what's under that house," Dinah whispered, glancing toward the manor. "You won't find peace if you do." "I ain't looking for peace," Martha said. "I'm looking for truth." Dinah sighed, "Then you better come quiet." They moved through the shadows, skirts brushing the wet earth. Dinah led her toward the edge of the old smokehouse, where the chimney had long been sealed with bricks. She pried one loose with a trembling hand, reached in, and drew out a bundle wrapped in rotting linen. Inside were pieces of wood marked in ash, words, numbers, tally marks carved with a nail. "This," Dinah whispered, "belonged to Eleanor." Martha frowned. "Who's that?" "The one who knew too much." By the faint glow of a stolen candle, they studied the marks. Each piece of wood carried a name: Hannah, Judith, Sarah, Millie. Alongside each name, a number, and then a single carved symbol, a circle with a line through it. She kept count. Dinah said, "Every woman called to the house, every one that ain't come back." "How many?" Dinah swallowed hard. 43. Martha stared at the pieces, her heartbeat loud in her ears. And this Elena, what happened to her? "Gone, like the rest, but she left them signs. Said one day someone brave enough would come to read 'em." Martha touched the carvings with her fingers. "Then I reckon I'm the one." The days after that discovery turned heavy with tension. Martha began noticing more the patterns Elena had once seen. The same 3 men who worked at night. The same lantern light that flickered near the ground behind the house. Once she saw Red in himself descend the steps after dark, carrying a ledger under his arm. He was followed by Dr. Shaw, the plantation physician, his gloves already stained. The next morning, a new baby was born, and the mother, Lottie, vanished. At breakfast, Martha asked Dinah quietly, "Where's Lottie?" Dinah's spoon froze midair. "Don't ask that. She had a baby. I heard it cry. You won't hear it again." Martha leaned closer. "You helped Elena, didn't you? You kept this safe." Dinah's eyes glistened. "I did once. Cost me my sister. They took her down there. Said she was to serve a higher purpose. Ain't never seen her again." Martha clenched her jaw. "Then we going down there tonight." Dinah grabbed her arm. "No, you don't understand. The cellar's got voices. You go down, you come back wrong." But Martha's mind was already set. That night she waited until the quarters were asleep. She crept out barefoot, moving between shadows until she reached the back of the manor. The ivy-covered door stood silent. She pressed her ear against the iron. Nothing. Then from beneath came a sound like breathing. She gripped the handle. It was cold. She pulled locked. But just as she turned to leave, she heard footsteps. She ducked behind a tree, heart hammering, as 2 men appeared, one holding a lantern, the other dragging a sack. They opened the cellar door, the hinges moaning softly, and vanished inside. The door swung half, shut behind them. Martha waited until the glow disappeared into the earth. Then she moved. She slipped through the gap, down the stone steps, and into the dark. The air grew thick, heavy with iron and decay. The deeper she went, the more the walls seemed to close around her. Her foot struck something metal, a chain. Another step and she saw it. Cages, dozens of them, rusted, small. And then she saw something worse. A table, straps, tools. Her stomach lurched. She covered her mouth. On the wall, by the flickering torchlight, she saw words carved deep into the stone. "I am still here." Elena's name was scratched beneath it. Martha backed away, tears burning her eyes. She turned and froze. Someone was standing in the shadows. A voice, low and calm. "You weren't invited down here." It was Major Redden. He stepped forward, face half, lit by the torch. "Curiosity is a dangerous thing, Martha. My women are not meant to suffer. They're meant to serve a purpose higher than themselves." Martha's voice trembled, but she didn't back down. "What you doing to them?" Redden smiled faintly. "Building a better generation. Ones who'll never question, never flee. My Cella. Borns will inherit a perfect order." Her fists clenched. "You breed people like cattle," he sighed. "Cattle at least run, my people know peace." When she spat at his feet, his smile faded. "Take her," he said. 2 men grabbed her arms. She screamed, kicked, fought until the world went black. When she woke, she was back in her cabin, her wrists bruised, her head pounding. Dinah sat beside her, eyes swollen from crying. "They let you live," she whispered. "That means he got plans for you." Martha stared at the ceiling, voice cold and steady. "Then he don't know what I got planned for him." For 3 days after the encounter with Major Redden, Martha was kept under watch. She worked in silence, her mind racing, her wrists sore from the struggle. She knew what she'd seen wasn't a nightmare. It was the truth buried under the plantation's polished calm. The other women whispered when she passed. They knew she had gone below and come back breathing, something no one had done before. But they also knew what came next. No woman defied Redden and lived long. Yet Martha's spirit was fire. The fear that ruled Cella for decades had begun to crack. That night, she sat with Dinah again, the journal boards spread before them. By the flicker of the oil lamp, she traced the carved names with her finger. "There's more down there," Martha said. "Not just what I saw, there's a message, I could feel it." Dinah shook her head. "You go back down, you don't come up. You already been spared once. He spared me for a reason," Martha said quietly. "He think fear gone shut me up, but it done the opposite." Dinah's hands trembled as she reached into her apron. From it she pulled a small iron key. "Found this under the chapel steps years ago. Didn't know what it opened. Maybe now I do." Near midnight, when the guards grew drowsy, Martha slipped out again. The rain had returned steady, soft, covering her footsteps. She moved like a shadow through the fields, past the cane rows and the still cabins, until she reached the manor. The ivy door stood silent. She slid the key into the lock. It turned with a groan. The air that met her was colder than before. She descended the steps, lantern in hand, until she reached the first level. The cages, the chains, the table. But this time she didn't stop there. She followed the faint sound of dripping water deeper into a tunnel lined with brick and bone. She found another door, smaller, older. It wasn't built by Redden. It belonged to the original house. The hinges were rusted, but when she pushed, it opened into a chamber that made her knees weaken. The walls were covered in carvings, hundreds of names scratched into the stone, overlapping, layered, fading with time. Women's names, dates, symbols. In the center of the room stood an iron cradle. Inside it, she saw a bundle of rags. She lifted them, bones, tiny, wrapped in silk. Beside the cradle lay a final plank of wood, smoother than the rest, with fresh marks burned into it. It read, "To the one who finds this, we are the mothers of Cella. Remember us." Eleanor's mark was there again. Martha's breath shook. Her vision blurred. She felt every heartbeat of every woman whose name filled those walls. This wasn't just a cellar. It was a graveyard. Behind her, a floorboard creaked. She spun around. In the doorway stood Dr. Shaw, his white gloves glinting in the lantern light. "You shouldn't be here," he said softly. "Major Redden warned you once." Martha raised the lantern. "You help him do this," he hesitated. "I do what I must. Progress demands sacrifice." "Sacrifice," she hissed. These was women, not cattle, not experiments. He stepped closer. "He's building a future, Martha. When the war comes, our kind will need workers born to serve, not revolt." Martha shook her head slowly. "You call it a future. I call it hell." Then she swung the lantern. The flame burst against the wall, oil splattering, fire catching on the dry wood. Shaw cried out, stumbling back as the smoke began to rise. Martha ran. The tunnel behind her glowed orange. She climbed the stairs 2 at a time, the sound of fire and shouting echoing from below. Bursting into the open air, she gasped, and found Dinah waiting near the tree line, holding a bundle. "You did it?" Dinah asked, eyes wide. Martha nodded, chest heaving. "I seen it all, every lie, every bone." From the distance, alarms rang. Men shouted. The smell of smoke spread. "What you gon' do?" Dinah asked. Martha looked back at the manor, flames licking through the cellar door. "I'm gon' finish what Eleanor started." They ran through the cabins, waking the women one by one. "Get up," Martha hissed. "It's time." Fear turned to confusion, confusion to realization. The women gathered, barefoot, trembling, eyes wide as the night filled with firelight. "The ones below, they gone," Martha said, "but we still here. If we stay, we next. It's time we run." For the first time in 30 years, someone said the word out loud. Run, and for the first time the women didn't look down. Behind them, the house crackled. Flames climbed the walls like judgment. The men shouted for water, but it was too late. The cellar, the cella itself, was burning. Martha led the way toward the swamp, Dinah beside her, carrying what little they could. Dozens followed, silent shadows cutting through the cane, through the fog, toward a horizon none of them had ever seen. As they fled, the sky began to lighten with dawn. For the first time, the women of Cella saw the sun rise outside the plantation gates, and for the first time, the land that had silenced them for generations trembled with their footsteps. The fire spread faster than anyone could have imagined. The wind carried embers across the fields, setting dry cane alight, turning the night into a storm of sparks. From the house to the chapel, from the barn to the quarters, Cella Plantation was waking, not to the bell, but to chaos. The overseers shouted orders, dogs barked, chains rattled, and panic poured through the air like smoke. Through it all, Martha moved with purpose. Her voice cut through the noise like a blade. "Get the children first," she yelled. "Wake every soul that's breathin'." The women obeyed, not out of fear, but faith. Something in her tone had shattered their long silence. The calm obedience that Redden prized had turned to fire. Inside the manor, Major Redden stormed through the halls, shouting for his men. His white shirt was smeared with soot, his eyes wild. The cellar below was collapsing, his life's work, his experiment, his empire of control burning away. "Find them," he roared. "Not one woman leaves this property." But his men hesitated. The flames had cut off the main stairway. The heat drove them back, and over it all, the sound of voices rose, hundreds of them singing. The hymn that once masked their pain had become their war cry. Outside, near the fields, Dinah stumbled, clutching her side. She'd been struck by a guard's whip while helping the younger women escape. Blood ran down her arm, but she kept moving. Martha grabbed her, pulling her into cover behind a wagon. "You hurt bad?" Martha asked. Dinah coughed, shaking her head. "Ain't the first time. Keep goin', girl." They watched as the overseers tried to rally. Mr. Paulding, the chief foreman, was dragging a rifle, shouting threats. "Back to your quarters. Y'all ain't goin' nowhere." But no one listened. Martha stood, picked up a fallen tool, a shovel slick with mud, and stepped into the torchlight. "You been tellin' us when to eat, when to breathe, when to bleed," she said. "Tonight, you gon' learn what it mean when we stop listenin'." Paulding aimed the rifle. Martha swung first. The shovel cracked against his arm. The rifle fired wild into the sky. He fell backward into the mud as the women surged forward, dozens of them, fueled by decades of rage. They didn't scream. They didn't plead. They took back their voices in silence, their vengeance in unity. By the time Redden reached the courtyard, the plantation he'd built on silence had become an inferno. His men were fleeing, the fences were broken, the women were gone, and in the center of it all stood Martha. He saw her through the haze, her face streaked with soot, eyes like burning coal. For a moment neither spoke. "You think you can undo what I made?" he said, his voice shaking. "I ain't undo it." Martha answered, "I'm indin it." He raised his pistol. "You're a fool, girl. Without me, you got nothing." Martha stepped closer, fire reflecting in her eyes. "Without you, we got everything." He fired, but the shot missed as the burning roof cracked above him. A beam fell, crushing him beneath it. His scream was drowned by the roar of fire. Martha turned away. As the women ran for the tree line, Dinah stumbled again. Martha caught her half, carrying her through the smoke. "Leave me," Dinah rasped. "Not leaving nobody," Martha said. They reached the swamp's edge just as the sky began to pale with dawn. Behind them, Cella Plantation burned like a dying star. The air was thick with ash and the smell of freedom, bitter, real, alive. Martha stopped and turned back. She saw the house collapse inward, the roof folding, sparks shooting into the heavens. She whispered, "For Eleanor, for everyone they took." Dinah touched her hand weakly. "They'll come for us, you know." Martha nodded. "Then let 'em. We done hid long enough." When the sun broke over the trees, the survivors gathered 40 women, some with infants, some with nothing but the clothes on their backs. They looked to Martha, waiting. "We ain't slaves no more," she said. "We're witnesses. What they did down there, the world gone know." They moved through the swamp, their footprints swallowed by the mud. their voices carrying in soft hums not of sorrow but remembrance. Behind them, the plantation that had never lost a woman finally lost them all, and beneath its ashes the breeding Cella turned to dust. The fire at Cella Plantation burned for 3 days. By the time the smoke cleared, the land that had once gleamed with white fences and cotton rows lay in black ruin. No one in Wilcox County could remember a blaze so fierce or so strange. The sheriff's men found no bodies, only ash and bone, and whispers spread through the towns like wind. The slaves burned the house themselves. The women escaped through the swamp. Major Redden's spirit still screams under the ground. But the truth, the one not written in ledgers or papers, lived in the footsteps that vanished into the wet earth, leading south toward the Mobile River. Martha led the group through the swamp in silence. The air was thick with the hum of insects and the scent of smoke still clinging to their clothes. Many were barefoot, bleeding from the reeds. Dinah walked beside her, her breathing shallow, clutching her side where the lash had cut deep. "Keep moving," Martha whispered. "We get to the river by dawn." Behind them, mothers carried babies wrapped in rags. Others dragged small children through the mud. Every step was a struggle between fear and hope. The world beyond the plantation was unknown, a wilderness of hounds, patrols, and bounty hunters. But none of them turned back. For the first time in decades, they were walking on land that didn't belong to anyone. By morning, they reached the Tombigbee Creek, its slow current glimmering in the gray light. Martha scouted ahead and found a flatboat half, sunk in reeds, left behind by fishermen weeks earlier. It could carry maybe 8 people at a time. "We go in turns," she said, quiet, no sound. Dinah stayed behind with the last group, insisting others cross first. Martha didn't like it, but Dinah smiled faintly. "Always wanted to see the river, even if it's from this side," she said. Martha hugged her hard before stepping into the boat. As they pushed off, the current caught them, pulling them toward the open water. For a brief moment, freedom felt real, the wind cool on their faces, the plantation fading behind them like a bad dream. Then came the dogs. The barking echoed across the trees, sharp, fast, closing in. Men's voices followed. "Tracks head to the river. Bring the torches." Martha's heart pounded. She shoved the oar harder, whispering faster. The women rowed desperately. The boat scraped against rocks, groaning under the weight. From the opposite bank, Dinah waved them on, shouting, "Don't stop." Just as the first torchlight broke through the trees behind her, she turned. The patrolmen emerged from the brush, rifles raised. Martha screamed, "Dinah, run!" But Dinah didn't move. She looked back at Martha one last time, lifted her chin, and said softly, "Keep going, girl. Don't let it end here." Then she struck a match. The torch she held ignited the dry grass at her feet. Fire racing back toward the men. Gunshots cracked, smoke billowed, and in the chaos, Martha's boat slipped into the main river current, disappearing into the fog. Dinah's fire burned bright behind them, the last flame of the Cella women's rebellion. 2 days later, the survivors reached a small trading post near the Alabama border. They hid in the woods while Martha approached alone, covered in soot, her hair matted. She found an old freedman there, Jonas Reeves, a ferryman known for helping escapees reach the Underground Railroad. He stared at her, then at the group behind her. "You come from the Redden place." Martha nodded slowly. "Not no more, it gone. He didn't ask questions. He gave them food, bandages, and a place to rest. That night, for the first time, Martha slept without walls. But when she dreamed, it wasn't of fire, it was of faces. The women carved into Eleanor's walls. The children who never grew. The cellar that burned but wasn't forgotten. Weeks passed. The group split, some continuing north through the safe houses, others settling in small black communities along the river. Martha stayed behind long enough to see each one find shelter. Before leaving, she carved something into an oak tree near the waterline. "We were here, we lived. Cella burns, but we still breathe." She pressed her hand against the bark, whispering a prayer for Dinah, Eleanor,
and every woman who never reached this shore. Then she turned north, carrying with her a story that no one wanted to believe, and that no one would ever forget. Months later, newspaper clippings began to appear in scattered corners of the South. Fire destroys notorious Wilcox Plantation. Local doctor missing, presumed dead. Unidentified Negro woman leads uprising. The official records called it an accident. The survivors called it deliverance. But in the hidden corners of history, in whispers passed between women in slave quarters, in hymns sung soft enough not to draw a whip, the story took a new name. By the spring of 1849, the ashes of Cella Plantation had been buried beneath wild grass. Nature moved quickly, swallowing what man had made and what fire had undone. The grand house was gone, the breeding cellar caved in, its stones scattered like teeth, but the land remembered. When the wind passed through the trees, it made a sound like weeping. When the rains came, bones surfaced in the fields, small, fragile ones. The new owner, a merchant from Montgomery, built no new house there. He said the ground was unquiet. His workers refused to stay after sundown. The locals whispered that the Cella women still walked at night, their songs riding the fog that drifted up from the river. Martha never went back. She made it north, reaching Cincinnati, where she worked under a false name in a boarding house for freedwomen. No one there knew she had led a revolt. No one knew she had burned a plantation. But sometimes, when she washed clothes by the river, she'd see her reflection in the dark water and whisper, "Dinah, we made it." Years later, a young abolitionist came through town, collecting testimonies from escaped slaves. His name was Elias Morrow, and he'd heard rumors, a story about women who burned their master's house to the ground. When he asked around, someone pointed him to Martha. She laughed when he told her what he'd heard. They got half of it wrong, she said. Then, after a long silence, she began to speak. She told him about Elinor's hidden journal, about the cellar, the breeding experiments, the women chained to silence. She spoke of Dinah's last fire, and of the hymn that turned into rebellion. Elias wrote it all down, filling pages with trembling hands. "People should know this," he said. Martha looked him in the eye and answered, "People ain't ready for it." He promised to publish her words one day. But when he died during the war, his papers vanished, confiscated, lost, or destroyed. Her story slipped back into the dark, folded under the noise of history. A century passed. The land changed hands again and again. No one ever built on it. Farmers said their plows broke on something buried deep, not rocks, not roots, something harder. In 1932, an archaeologist surveying antebellum ruins near Wilcox County stumbled on the site. Beneath layers of clay, he found the outline of a cellar, stone walls, rusted shackles, the remains of what looked like medical instruments. He wrote a brief paper calling it a possible experimental facility linked to plantation medicine. The report was filed and forgotten, but the locals still wouldn't go near it. They said when the wind blew from the river, you could hear women humming, soft and low, just below the sound of the reeds. In 1971, long after anyone remembered the Redden name, a black school teacher named Clara Jennings bought the property at auction. "Turn it into every ASOUL that stew. I refiike to Center Surrey. A place to teach local children the stories their textbooks left out." During construction, her workers found a stone near the edge of the old field. On it were carved faint words. "We were here, we lived, Cella burns, but we still breathe." No one could explain it. No records, no witnesses, no origin. But Clara knew it wasn't an accident. She cleaned the stone, set it upright, and built her school around it. Every morning, she made her students touch it before class and say aloud, "We were here." Today, if you drive along the back roads of Wilcox County, you won't find Cella Plantation on any map. The trees have grown thick. The swamp reclaimed the edges, and the land looks peaceful. But if you stop, step out, and listen carefully, you might still hear something, not a sound, exactly, but a feeling. The air carries a weight, a whisper that sits between the trees and the water.
And if you listen close enough, you'll swear you hear women's voices, not crying, not praying, just singing softly. We ain't slaves no more. The ground remembers what men tried to bury.
The fire that burned Cella did not end in ashes. It carried through generations, in every woman who spoke when silence was safer, in every survivor who chose to live, and in every forgotten place that once held pain. Because history doesn't die in the dark, it waits for someone